All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me on Strive Conversations, talking about compassionate leadership in the age of anti-racism. My name is Melissa Tele, and I'm the founder of Strive With Me, which is a platform making personal development and social change more accessible to busy people, and also your host for Strive Conversations, which is where we like to make uncomfortable topics about personal development and social change a little bit more comfortable. And I'm very excited for our amazing speaker tonight, Magalie. She's an incredible human being, professional. She's going to share a little bit about herself because I don't think I can do it justice. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Magalie René. I am a corporate facilitator, a speaker, and an author. I am super committed to compassionate leadership. I really believe the future of work is compassionate, and everything that I talk about, everything that I do really comes out of that. So as we are moving into an age of taking control and changing paradigms around how we look at race in this country, in our organization, in our organizations, in our businesses, it's really important. In my opinion, it is very, very important to begin at the beginning, and we begin with foundational principles, and compassion is the first place to start. Compassion for yourself, compassion for others, and in that you become the kind of leader who creates the culture and the environment within which people can thrive and strive, right? So I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited to be jumping into this conversation about what compassionate leadership is, and what anti-racism is, if you are not familiar, and even if you are, how those two things come together. So very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
And thank you. We're going to jump right in to that and kind of really break it down. That's one of the things that I've been learning a lot as we're having this conversation is there are certain terms that are very popular. They're also very like emotionally charged, and we need to like kind of almost break that down because not everyone has the same understanding, right? Especially when you're like trained and you're very knowledgeable in this, and this is your life's work and or your life's experience. It's very different for someone that may not have shared that experience. So before I jump into the questions, we want you to be a part of this conversation with us in the chat box. So please, as I ask these questions, if you have an answer, if you have a experience, please feel free to share that in the chat because we want to hear from you as well. And then if we have room at the end, we will be able to kind of bring up some of those questions. So we're going to get started with, let's talk about what is compassionate leadership.
Okay, so if you guys, I'm sure you went to the Eventbrite and you signed up for this. So really, we explained it in the Eventbrite listing for this event, and I'm going to go over that again. Compassionate leaders are the kinds of people who grow and develop their people and the communities they serve. So they listen actively, they're empathetic, they're emotionally intelligent, they are outward focused, they get that it's not about me. They understand the outward focus, and they understand that it's really about the collective, and they're committed to challenging themselves and to challenging narratives that would have them stuck, right? They are innovative, and they're really committed to, and they are all those ways so that they can grow their people, so that they can develop their businesses, so that they can be innovative. So
yeah, so I think that that's such an interesting way for you to put it, because I feel like for me, I'm a huge personal development nerd. I love studying like leaders, and I think that they make such a big difference.
yeah.
And now in the age, as we like title this event, in the age of anti-racism, leadership looks different than maybe the normal day to day. And so before just as we define compassionate leadership, let's talk about what anti-racism is, because there's a difference between anti-racist and not being racist. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think, so there was something that you just said that really kind of like struck a chord for me, which is that now we're being asked to approach leadership in a different way. And yes and no. At the end of the day, I think there is a successful and effective leader, and then there is a leader who is not effective, right? So there's an effective and an ineffective leader. And I would actually say, I would challenge the idea that all of a sudden, in order to be a good leader, you've got to be a compassionate leader now. I think this has always been the case. And I think the best leaders have always been the ones who have leaned into the ways of being versus doing. And that now is ever more important now, but it isn't a new thing. In order to be a successful manager, you've always had to relate to your employees. In order to be a colleague that people want to be around, that gets support from their team, that is contributing in the best way, the kinds of people that people are like, yeah, let's go out with this person, let's hang out and get a beer after work. Like, you've always had to be the kind of person who knows how to relate to many different types of people. Mm-hmm. And that is compassionate leadership. So now that we're in this age of anti-racism, I'm gonna dig into the answer to your question, which is that, you know, I'm going to get graphic here for a moment. So I don't want to trigger anyone, but I think it's very important to make this visceral and make this real. So I'm prefacing by saying, if this is going to make you, this is potentially triggering, so be present to that and put me on mute if that's going to support you. I'll put my hand up once I'm done talking about it, but it's about rape, right? So I'm starting right now, putting my hand up. If you were at a party and you heard someone being assaulted in the next room, you knew what was going on, and you didn't do anything about it, does that make you a rapist? Absolutely not. You're not the rapist, but you're not an anti-rapist, right? And so you're bystanding. It's a very visceral, graphic way to put this. And generally, I tend to come at this from a very light place. But I think it's really important to understand the difference between I am not a racist. So I'm going to put my hand up because I'm done talking about the graphic thing. So I am not a racist, but what is the value of not being a racist if you are receiving the rewards of systemic racism and not challenging that as the status quo? Not leaning in and taking action to do something to create a unified world, to create a society where we have equity and we are equal. So does that explain it?
That's so interesting you say that, because when we talk about it, so yes, you're not you're not a racist if you like see that, but you're also not anti-racist. So I think that there are people that are not, like we talked about, like not being racist and being anti-racist is a very proactive choice. And then now I'm also curious with your example, and I don't want to bring up it too much, but like, how does that differentiate from being a bystander and an enabler? Because I think that when it comes to, similar to the example you've given, which we don't have to go into, because we don't want anyone to kind of be triggered by it, but more so, there are people that like I've grown up, like friends, when we didn't know, we would say things, and then it was like, oh, ha ha ha, that didn't feel right with me, and that was an attack on someone, but I don't know if it's my place to say anything. And I know it's a little off script, but I'm curious to hear about like the action.
No, I think it's super important. I think it's important. I think that we're looking now at, this is a paradigm shift that's happening culturally, societally, in organizations, in the micro, in the home, with your friends, with your network, and it's happening globally and universally, right? So many huge shifts are happening. So we're in a new moment. And I like to think about life and creating the world that I want from this moment. I use the past to inform me, and then I decide from this moment forward, what do I want to create? So right now, we're in a moment where allyship, being an ally, what does that really mean? I feel like we're on this precipice of creating this new world, this new organization, this new human, right? And perhaps this human is compassionate. Perhaps this organization is compassionate. Perhaps this ally is active. Perhaps the changes that we want to make in the world we want to create, Perhaps that it's no longer enough in this moment to simply say, I am not this bad thing. We're in a new time where it's an opportunity to do something new, to behave differently, to engage in a way that we haven't before, because now we're creating these new meanings and new definitions around some of these age-old terms, right? Yeah. Ally has been around forever. Comrade has been around forever. Friend, forever, right? But what does that mean now?
Yeah.
How do I get to operate right now? And it's also not about self-beat up. So I want to address if there have been moments where you haven't said anything, where you've been a bystander, where you've been not racist, but you haven't been anti-racist. This is an opportunity, again, not to use the past to beat ourselves up and make ourselves wrong. There's enough of that in the world. This is an opportunity to use that to inform us as to how we're going to operate moving forward, which is very exciting and inspiring. And it isn't about shame or blame or guilt. It's about, I see this is new. I've been climbing this mountain. I had an astrology session last night, and it's one of the things that I do in my Facebook group. It's a thing. But we did astrology for entrepreneurs, and one of the analogies that my resident expert astrologer used was, it's okay to climb up a mountain, be halfway there to the peak, look up and say, I think I'm climbing the wrong mountain. I don't think I want to climb this mountain anymore. It doesn't feel good anymore. It doesn't inspire me anymore. It's dark, it's angry, it's heavy, it's scary. I don't want to climb this mountain. I'm going to go down and climb another mountain. So we all get to look. The mountain is not the thing that changes, right? It's just how we decide to engage with the mountain, right? We can go down without self-beat up, climb a new mountain. And that's how I look at allyship and friendship and anti-racism, because it's just a term, right? Yeah. People are getting super caught up in like that term. Yeah. And it's really just about being active, proactive.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting as we kind of set the foundation for this conversation. And I'm seeing more and more people say, like you can't give yourself that title of an ally. You have to earn that. And by earning that, it's through those actions and being proactive. And I just want to, one last term I want to go into, because a lot of us are having these kind of conversations, and the word that keeps popping up is empathy. And I feel like empathy is such a big part of compassion. And it's also a big part of leadership as well. So can you break down what empathy looks like? Because there's an argument between empathy and sympathy. So what is empathy? How is that different from sympathy? And what does empathy look like in a leadership role?
So I don't have an intellectual answer for this, but I definitely have one that's very practical. And I'm going to attempt, since it's already 3:20, I'm going to attempt to keep this brief so that we can get to more questions. So I think some people mistake sympathy and tenderness for empathy. So sympathy and tenderness are both emotional, right? They have an emotional component to it. And I would actually argue that empathy doesn't need to be emotional. A lot of people, depending on where you fall on any number of the personality tests, right? Myers-Briggs or DISC, you may not be an emotional person, and that's okay. It actually doesn't empathy doesn't require an emotional response. Although I do think in corporate spaces, it would be wise to begin to integrate head and heart, which is what I'm talking about with compassion. But I think empathy is about perspective shift again. Mm-hmm. It moves us out of that's too bad for you, to instead curiosity. And perhaps asking the question, how can I better understand or relate to where this person is coming from? Perhaps asking yourself that question can begin to have you move into empathy without attaching it to emotion or getting caught up in how am I supposed to be acting right now? Yeah. It's not about acting. It's really about asking yourself, how can I understand and better relate to where someone is coming from? And then on the back end of that, how can I now communicate with this person in a way that has them experience being seen and heard, has them see that it was my intention to understand and relate to them. That's how I look at empathy.
Yeah, it's interesting because Christina just asked, can you define ally really quickly?
Well, I think ally has meant a lot of different things over the course of centuries, decades, over the course of time. Right now, in this moment, I think an ally is someone who takes an active role and is an active participant in the well-being of someone they are allied with. So if your friend is being hurt, then as a friend and as an ally, what would you do? Right? You would protect that friend. You would call it out. You would be in active support. You would be in active defense. You would be engaged in what we're now calling allyship. So I think of ally as an active well-being, active support.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so it's interesting because now so many people are having conversations about racism and anti-racism. Many of them are way overdue, but I'm curious to hear how can you be compassionate with people who are not willing to be anti-racist, and how can leaders respond compassionately when they may not agree or align with their teammates' beliefs or experiences regarding anti-racism?
I love this question. Oh, I love it. I love this question because it gets to the heart of where I enjoy living, right? Which is in the space of what does it mean to be a compassionate leader? But leader doesn't necessarily mean in the workplace and in the office. That's what we're talking about in this context. But that can also be leader in your life, leader in your relationship, leader with your children, a leader in your partnerships. It can mean anything. So this really gets down to the heart of things, and I'm using the word heart really deliberately. It's an opportunity to ask yourself, and I'd say this is a journal prompt. So if anybody feels compelled after this to do some introspection, being introspective and kind of digging into your own belief systems around this, I would ask a question. I'd answer this question with a question, which is, what does it mean? What does unconditional love mean to you? So that's the question prompt, is what does unconditional love mean to you? And I leave that there so that you can journal on that and do some introspection for yourself afterwards and get clear on what that means. Because I believe if we approach people with compassion, from a place of compassion, and if we begin to understand, so we've got hate on one side, racism on one side, fear, all the things that lie in this like negativity space. And on the other side, supposedly it's only two things. It's hate and love, or you can replace hate with fear and love. So if we're going to combat racism and all of the harm that does, then on the other side of it, we've got to connect ourselves to love, right? In some way, we've got to exhibit that. And I'd say unconditional love has me be able to see past the trauma, the pain, the darkness in any human being to find a way to have compassion. So it's not an easy thing. It's actually a deep, deep practice. There is no finger snapping to make this easy. So I don't have like a magic pill for you guys. I wish I did have an easy answer. But the answer really is to find compassion. How can you find compassion for this person? What has their upbringing looked like? What have they been feeding themselves? Meaning like, what have they been watching? What have they been reading? How have they been engaging with the world? Maybe what kind of pain are they in that this is what it's turned into? It's turned into them bringing that kind of pain into their workplace, into the home, into relationships, to the Thanksgiving table, right? So really finding compassion. That's how I would say finding compassion. Yeah. I was going to say common ground, but sometimes it's even harder to find common ground. So start with compassion.
Yeah, no, I think I think you did a good job with that. I think it's interesting. The question kind of focuses on, like really separate the idea of like alignment versus agreement. Like it's okay if you don't always agree with someone, but you kind of almost want to see in the workplace, how can we align, like a greater vision and value?
Yeah, so that's, so thank you for bringing that up, because we talked about this earlier this week, so thank you. This is a good facilitator right here. Alignment versus agreement. So if we're going to bring this into the workplace, You've dug into the compassion piece and you're practicing that. Now, how do you make that applicable and tangible in your workplace? Yeah. And I'd say you don't always need to agree, you just get to align. There's a big difference between alignment and agreement. And really, with alignment, everybody loses a little bit and everybody wins a bit. It's just about finding that place of, I don't love the word compromise, because compromise often to me means someone loses out in a way where someone wins and someone loses. And we're not looking for the either or here. We're looking for that gray area in between.
So you want a win-win.
You want a win-win, and you want to create that through alignment. Like, yeah, I don't agree with your point of view. You may not agree with mine, but what is our vision overall for this company? What is going to get us there? How are we going to be able to work with one another day to day to day to day through all of the minutia and drama that happens in the workplace in such a way where we can do so in some semblance of peace, right? That takes alignment. And it means everybody gets to win a little.
Yeah. So
nobody's going to get everything they want.
So we're going to stay at the workplace for a little bit. How can leaders of small businesses create a culture focused on anti-racism when some of the choices may feel like they're coming against an urgent consideration of keeping the business afloat? I think a lot of times now there's so many, because of the pandemic, because of everything, they feel like they need to focus on the business, and depending on where you are in your leadership journey, culture may not be top of mind. But I think now more than ever, we need to really focus on crafting and ensuring that there is a culture that is well thought out and is focused on anti-racism.
Yeah, so this is interesting. This is a great question, because I just recently, so I've been doing quite a bit of work with organizations and with their leaders and with C-suites and talking through all of this and getting clear for them, supporting them in creating the kind of container where they can create lasting change, so sustainable change around this topic of Black Lives Matters, around the topic of racism or anti-racism, should I say. And this is a big concern. It's a big, big, big concern. And I love this question. And I'd say what I'm learning and what leaders of small businesses and larger businesses are learning is that there's no way around this. If you want to keep your people, good people, I'm not talking about like diehard racists who we can't listen, that they're on their own journey, right? I'm not going to sway them. I'm talking about people that are good people. If you want to keep those people in the business, especially now that for those small businesses, a lot of small businesses have had to cut down on their staff. They've had to furlough people. That means that your remaining employees are taxed. Your remaining employees are stretched thin. They are doing their very best for you, right? And they're working hard to make sure that you all together collectively make it through this very challenging time. In order for them to feel good about doing that kind of work for you, the culture must be the kind of culture that supports them in feeling good about themselves. And that's this is an actual question that's been in the space for more than one of my clients is, well, what can we do? Because right now, I think a lot of businesses equate making a difference and creating sustainable change with a budget. They think they need to have like a big budget. So that's part two of this. First, culture is necessary. If you don't keep the culture, if you're not keeping up with where this world is going, and you're not paying attention to themes like Black Lives Matter and themes like racism, and you're not making your employees feel like they're working for the kind of company that they can feel good about working for, right? They're not going to be willing to do their hard work. That's one. Second is, it doesn't always take a blockbuster budget. There are organizations where time is what is of the most value. How can you promote? So there were so many, let's just use STEM as an example. There were so many mentorship opportunities with organizations that are working with youth, underserved youth, right? Where they can be mentored by people in your workspace, in your workplace, in your organization. So that's another way, right? And that doesn't take money and a big budget, it takes time and I give a crap, right? Like I care enough to share this with my organization, to promote some of these different organizations, these nonprofits, and find ways for my employees to support them. That doesn't even take a budget. So it's about caring enough to begin to innovate and to be creative in the ways that you contribute to sustainable, lasting change. And that begins in the employee pipeline. And that starts when people are, when kids are students. How do we get more Black executives? We are doing the work to support those communities in having them build the skills that are necessary to become those executives. So it's a deeper conversation. It's a longer term vision. And if you really want sustainable change, and you're in for the long haul, and being in for the long haul is about creating a 1-year plan, a 6-month plan, a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and a plan that goes well beyond COVID and when your company is in crisis, right? Your company's in crisis now, but if you're planning, then you're planning for the long term. And when you do have your budgets back under control, where are you spending your money?
Yes.
So that's the third piece, is creating a plan, a long-term plan.
Amazing. And I love that you started out as like, hey, I'm learning and my clients are learning, and it doesn't matter where you are, like whether you're like a one person shop or running like a Fortune 50 company, we're all learning how to be more inclusive, how to be more empathetic, how to be more compassionate, and all of that. And like that attitude and that journey is really like kind of like the foundation of Strive, is like we're always striving to be better and growing and learning, and that's okay as long as your attitude is I want to do better and I want to grow. And so one question that we received, which is really great, when you have a white ally, how can you engage them in leading, especially when this individual is in a leadership position? What is the best approach to encourage said person to step up and be most importantly, be present?
I'd say you get to be the source. And by that, I mean, you get to be present. You get to be inspired. You get to model.
Model it for them?
Yeah, you get to model. Listen, it's not about teaching. It's about who do I choose to be. Such that, right? They talk about like attracts like. I know there's some like physics. Jacqueline is in that space on this call. I know there's some like scientific way to put this that I'm just going to botch completely, so I won't go there. But like attracts like, right? And so if you want to create an environment that is inclusive, that is supportive, then you get to be inclusive and supportive. You're not exempt from that because you're from my perspective, being in an oppressed group of people, being part of that group does not exempt you from being the kind of person that you're the soil for what you want to see grow, right? And I don't think you can force anyone to do anything. So I'm gonna backtrack and sort of answer this in 2 ways to keep it as concise as possible.
Thank you.
You get to get your ego out of the way. And there are 4 ways. I'm going to go quick with this, y'all, because we don't have a lot of time. But there are 4 ways.
You can rewind the recording. That's what was for.
Yeah, great. So there are 4 ways that the ego operates. The ego says, I want to be right. The ego says, I want to look good. The ego says, I want to be in control. And the ego says, I need to protect myself and be safe. Those conversations, those 4 conversations, have us acting in a way that is not actually intentional. So where we might be absolutely right about what we're talking about, anti-racism, we may be right about that. We're right that racism is wrong. Our approach, if it's coming from ego, turns into righteousness. Our approach turns into judgment. Our approach is actually disenrolling. And so when you're working with people in your workplace, you cannot shame them into changing. You've got to inspire them to change. And the way you inspire, so part 2 of this answer is the way, so 1 is you need to get your ego out of the way. Part 2 of this answer is the way that you inspire someone is by caring enough about them and what they care about to ask. You got to be curious and care about them. Again, we're coming back to compassion. What is that person's vision? So if it's your manager, what does your manager want out of life? What does your manager want for the business? What do they want in their career? And where does what they want coincide with creating a diverse and inclusive environment? That like Venn diagram, that little spot in the middle is where inspiration and change lies.
Yeah.
That's where you can inspire someone to change.
And I think it's interesting because that kind of ties back up to what you said before about compassion without assumption. Like I've been having these conversations with people. I don't know why I entertain myself in conversations online. And I don't like, I think it's more so like my version of an adrenaline junkie of like, I love jumping into uncomfortable conversations so that I can learn how to have them in a more compassionate, empathetic way. And one of the things that I've learned and practicing is not to make that assumption that it's coming from a place of malice or mean-spirited, but more so maybe ignorance or like there's a communication breakdown. So now when someone says something that I'm like, excuse me? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, instead of like just reacting and like typing like, well, derogatory word like F you and all that stuff, I take a moment and be like, hey, like, what did you mean by that? Like, can you explain that more?
Yeah, that curiosity is so important. And honestly, this is where compassion comes back to compassion, because you got to care enough about people to even care enough to want to know what they think.
Yes, instead of just like boxing them like, oh,
this person is this.
You're a racist, and just like, because that's very divisive, and it's also like a binary thinker where it's either you're with me or you're against me, or you're like racist or you're anti-racist. Like it's not that. And so going back to that example, they will like break it down, and it's interesting because they'll say, and I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying. I see where the miscommunication was, or like what the gap was and understanding. And then we are able to work through it, whatever that is. And then also I learned a new trick that when someone says like something that doesn't make you feel good, that they think it's a joke or they think it's funny, right? I came across this trick that they said, like, ask them to explain the joke.
Yep.
So if someone says, oh, like for example, like a microaggression that I received was like, oh, you're like pretty for an Asian girl. And I was like, oh, what do you mean by that?
Or like, what does it mean to be pretty for an Asian girl?
Yeah. And then in that moment, they take a step and they're like, what do I mean by that? And they're like, oh, like, you're pretty. But I was like, but what is the Asian girl?
Tell me what pretty means. What do you think is pretty? Like literally have them speak into it.
Yeah. Exactly. And the fact that they have to explain it kind of almost like they're almost unpacking it in real time. And they can either one, see it's not funny, or like two, double down to what it is. And then completely like, I don't like to play the dumb card, but like almost play like, okay, like what is that? Like and ask them to dig further. And then that kind of almost disarms them and like, oh, I actually guess I never really thought of that. And I was like, oh, okay, well, because it sounds like this. And I don't know that.
It's a trick of effective communication. You got to come from curiosity. That's always going to support people. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. And so you shared a little bit about this, but I want to ask you specifically, because we did get this question. How can leaders ensure lasting change in their organization?
I'd say it's about intention. Start with intention versus reaction. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give an analogy here. So intention versus reaction, because there's a lot of reaction. It's not a coincidence that the word act is in there, because if you're reacting, then you're acting. You're doing something in this moment to create some kind of outcome. And generally that's not going to be something that's sustainable, because sustainability is action that is duplicatable and easy to duplicate. It becomes easier and easier, and it is long lasting. So that's not just an immediate reaction. Reactions are like poof, and then it fizzles. And so the analogy here is begin to think of your leadership as the pot. It is the container, it is the environment. And the soil is the initiatives, the actions, the processes. And the plants are your people, your customers. And the oxygen that the plants let off is your impact and your results, possibly your money, right? Because like the oxygen feeds the plant and feeds the soil. Like it just, that's the sustainability. So if you begin, I think if we begin to look at leadership, we need to really break down the way we see leadership. I think we've seen leadership as the torch bearer, the person who holds a torch in the front and they're guiding people somewhere. Yes, that's leadership, but true leadership, the most effective, successful leaders in effective, successful organizations create a container. Leadership is the container. It's the container for the kind of environment and the kind of plants you're growing. So I think that's the way to look at it, because if you look what we've been doing over time, and the Me Too movement and sexual harassment training is a perfect example of this. Sexual harassment training has been mandated since the late 70s, if I'm not mistaken, if not the early 80s. But nothing really began to change on a deep, sustainable level in organizations and in industries until the Me Too movement. And that's because the Me Too movement created something different. It didn't create the initiative, the action, the process. It created a different environment. It created leaders that have a different understanding of what they want to create around women and gender in the workplace. That's the difference between something that is like, if we start at the initiative, we've already missed the mark. We are already in a place where we're just going to do something to do it. We're just doing something rote. We're expecting plants to grow and a whole shift, but we haven't actually shifted the pot. There's no container, right? So soil is going everywhere. It's going to get blown away by the wind. So we really need to begin at the beginning and begin with the kind of leaders that we want to be.
Yeah.
And that's going to dictate what we create long-term.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Another way to look at it is if you don't focus on building a really good, solid foundation, like whatever you build, you could build a barn, you could build a house, you could build a skyscraper. The more you build on it, the more it's going to crumble down because the foundation isn't good. But if you build a really solid foundation, you can build whatever you like and it will sustain itself. So I'm coming down to the last few questions. Please share your questions in the chat. I see you, Jimmy. That's a great question. We'll get to that. So another question that was submitted was, as a person of color and diversity and inclusion, how do you manage your own burnout and psychological safety in your day-to-day? Because holy cow, has that been like on fire for so many people right now. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I actually wrote this answer down in 4 steps because I wanted to know how many steps it was. Like I actually did some prep on this. So it's 4 steps and I'm going to go through them to really support you in some tactical, practical ways to maintain. And I would actually say that this is a process that anyone and everyone gets to implement. It's not just people of color. It just so happens to be that we're feeling it in a different way than non-people of color, because it's something that's I'm going to speak from I in this moment, right? This time is very charged for me in a way that it isn't charged in the same way for my non-Black friends. It just isn't. So I have these 4 steps, but I believe that everybody is going to get value out of using this. And I think we all get to use this, right? It's about boundaries, it's about a lot of things, but here's the first step. Get clear on what you need. So again, I look at life as I create my intention. I am intentional about the things that I do. So get clear on what you need. What do you need? Do you need rest? Do you need meditation in the morning? Do you need stillness? Do you need breaks in between? Do you need power hours or downtime hours where you're not doing anything? Do you need to take this phone and put it away out of your room so it's out of reach in the morning? What do you really need to recharge? Figure that out for yourself. That's step one. Second, release people pleasing. This especially goes for people of color in this moment where a lot has been asked of us around educating and communicating. I'm communicating now more than I've ever communicated in my life with my own friends. Like, it's been crazy. And so release people pleasing. You don't owe anyone anything. You get to take care of yourself by creating boundaries. And release guilt or shame or I feel bad that I don't want to educate someone. Like, I have felt guilty for the first 2 weeks of George Floyd's death, and then the week after that, I was like, and I'm an empath on top of that. I felt like I was physically assaulted. Like, I was crying. All of this stuff was going on. My aunt had passed away from COVID. Like, that's real life. And I realized I had this huge awakening and epiphany that I have been living my entire life. I've been gaslighting myself, pretending like racism isn't the elephant in the room because I've been wanting my friends to be comfortable so that I can be comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I've been gaslighting myself. Like, that epiphany happened the week after George Floyd. So I was done. Like, I'm getting emotional right now. But so what it came down to for me was that I had to tell myself it's okay that you are not available emotionally for people right now. That's okay. It's okay to rest, to cry, to reset, to journal, to do whatever. I meditate religiously. I do Kundalini practices. So it's okay to do all those things right now and not feel the need to please anyone. I don't owe anyone anything. That was step 2. Step 3 is responsibly communicate those needs.
Yeah.
So this is a piece that many people miss. Well, I don't owe you anything, but I'm also not going to tell you that I don't owe you anything. I'm going to expect that you can read my mind. Like, right? I'm just putting all of this onus. Really, that's just throwing my upset onto someone else. I don't owe anyone anything.
They're confused. Like, they have no idea what to do. Like, they're like, wait, did I do something?
Did I do something wrong? And again, how can we be compassionate humans, right? So it is not my responsibility to educate anyone, but it is my responsibility if I want a diverse, inclusive, loving, compassionate world to be those things. And so it's my responsibility to communicate my needs.
Yeah. And that's something, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's correct. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and that's something like I'm being more conscious of. Like, I think in the last year I really started to learn about setting boundaries and communicating and letting go of that guilt and shame, as you say. And then now, especially now, is checking like, hey, are you at an emotional place to talk about whatever it is, right? Like, whether that, and like if it is necessary, throw in a trigger warning or 2 and be like, hey, like, do you have the space for this? Like, or even feedback, like, hey, like, I noticed, like, you were talking about this topic. Are you in a space for feedback? And let them answer, because the more you kind of like pound it into someone and that's not willing to listen, it's just like a mess for both sides, because then now you're draining yourself too.
Yeah, that goes both ways. Like, you know, I always say ask for permission. That's in like workshops that I do around effective communication for collaborative change. And that's a huge piece of this kind of work. But, and my work is not solely diversity and inclusion, because that's not my specialty. I have friends that are, look up Stephanie Creary. She's a professor at Wharton. She's a scholar in this work. That's not what I am. But the work that I do is compassion based. And I'd say that, you know, there are effective ways to communicate with people, but really you've got to communicate your needs, because no one can support you if you're not communicating what you need effectively, right? And no one can read your mind. So a lot of people, non-POCs, non-people of color, want to be of support. They want to know what to do, and they don't know. So I don't need to tell you or educate you on what to do, but I can express and communicate with you how I want to be engaged with. Because also, not all people of color want to be engaged with the same way. And I think people miss that point too. Some friends of mine have been super triggered and in their own guilt conversations around doing it wrong, doing anti-racism wrong, because they're reading posts. This is like my white friends, right? Where they're reading posts and they're like, oh my God, I'm not going to say this anymore because this offended this one person that posted about it on Instagram. Like, listen, you've got to be in communication. So for people, non-people of color, you've got to ask the questions. You've got to ask for permission. I have a question to ask you because I want to know how to be with you in the most effective way. So this isn't about a bigger picture question. This is something I'm asking you because, Magalie, I want to know how to engage with you. I want to know how to be there for you. You've got to ask for permission to talk about it, and then you've got to ask the questions to find out how your one individual, person of color, friend, colleague, ally, how they want to be engaged with. This work isn't easy. I'm not saying it's easy, right? But it's really necessary if we want to create what we say we want to create. So to go through these again, get clear on what you need, release people pleasing, let go of that, responsibly communicate your needs. And the fourth and final is be disciplined about your self-care. We don't get to be victims of our children, our husbands, our wives, our partners, our businesses, our organizations, our managers, our colleagues. We don't get to be victims because it's very easy to fall into victimhood. It's somebody else's fault that I'm not taking care of me. No way. It is always on you. If your job is at risk, that's a different conversation. But get there. I'd say it's worth getting to that conversation rather than saying I'm a victim to this because I decided to give myself I decided to self-abandon on my self-care because I thought that I would be wronged by someone. I thought that someone would turn their back on me. I thought that maybe I would lose this friendship, partnership, relationship, job, whatever. Like, you can't make the decision to self-care from a place of fear. You've got to make it from an empowered space because you value yourself enough. You mean enough to you that it's not selfish to put yourself first. It's self-full. You can't give from an empty cup. And honestly, if you communicate the needs responsibly and you're finding that your employers are not supportive, go through the processes and steps to have that be transparent so everyone knows what's going on, right? Go through the proper channels to make sure that shifts, or to make sure that it's known how you're being dealt with. So that's a different conversation, and that's really more so about how you engage in unhealthy and toxic workplaces, which is not what this is about. But that fourth step really is about being disciplined about your self-care. I meditate every morning religiously. If I miss a day in the week. I am like, and nobody and nothing gets in the way of that because I value myself. And I know that in order to give, I've got to put my own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. Please feel free to throw your questions in the chat. I know we're running out of time. I'm going to ask you.
Try and answer them in one sentence.
I don't think you're going to be able to do that, girl, with the question that is coming up. But I'm going to ask you my closing questions, and we're going to go into the audience question. So when it comes to compassionate leadership in the age of anti-racism, what are 3 practices? I think you shared us so many, but for someone that really wants to like dig deep into this, what are 3 practices that you recommend them do?
I have a list of books. So if you follow me on social, and I'll share that at the end, then you can, I'll happily send that to you. I've got a list of resources. It's just like books you get to read. And those books are not just anti-racism and diversity and inclusion and those kinds of books. There are books on compassionate leadership, on effective communication. So educate yourself, build those muscles up, get the tools. Secondly, ground yourself in the tools that will support you in self-caring. So what are the ways of being? What are not the ways of being? What are the practices that you're going to implement that are going to support you in being a grounded human so that you can navigate through this time, whoever you are? And then third is leaning into ways of being. And by ways of being, I mean it's not the things that you're doing, it's who you are being while you're doing the things. So who do I want to be today? I want to be loving, open, I want to be empowered. Those 3 ways of being will have me act in a way. They will have me do my doing in very specific ways that will really feed me, that will be bringing in empowerment and love and all those ways of being into the world. So I'd say the third is really leaning into who do you want to be today? You can ask yourself that question every morning. Who do I choose to be today?
I love that. So the site, I have your website and your Instagram. Is that the one you were going to share? Because I have.
Yeah, totally. My website and my Instagram. If you go to my Instagram and you DM me, you direct message me with your email address, I will make sure that we send out the resource list to you.
Yes.
Just go. So it's Magalie_René. And if you look me up on Instagram, DM me, and I will definitely, even if you DM me and I'm not following you, I'll find it and I'll make sure that you're sent the document.
Amazing. Thank you for giving us consent to sliding into.
Yeah, slide into.
Yeah, it's important. It's important for them to get consent. Very important. What are you striving for?
I'm striving for a compassionate world. The future is compassionate, where people are courageous and they know the value that they bring. They bring that into every space they inhabit, and they become their safe space, and they become a safe space for others.
Amazing. Amazing. And what are some things that the community, the Shad community, and everyone that's watching can do to help you?
Refer me. I love public speaking. I really thrive in supporting teams and organizations and companies, individuals too, if you want a personal one-on-one coach, because I do that as well. But I thrive in supporting people with the way they're being and really creating success, tangible, practical success for themselves or their businesses through these sort of intangibles, right? The compassion. And nowadays, definitely bringing in that diversity and inclusion and anti-racism work as well.
Yes, amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to the one question that I don't think, because I know we're over time, I don't think you're going to be able to answer this in one sentence. But good luck to you.
No promises.
How do you, ready for this? So Jimmy White wants to know, how do you defeat systematic racism in the workplace? Good luck.
Grief. Well, I think there is no one answer. And I think that's the key. The first step is to know this is going to be a long-term process, and there is no one way to do it. It depends on your industry. It depends on your demographics. It depends on your intention. It depends on the company's vision. What do you want to create? There are so many pieces. But the first place and first thing I would say is the way you combat systemic racism is willingness. So if I leave you with anything, that's what I leave you with. You don't have to know the how. The how is something you're gonna build in partnership with other people. What you do need to have is the willingness. And if you're willing to have the conversation, to do the research, to think about it, to talk about it, to ask about it, to be curious, to engage, to love someone, to be compassionate with yourself and others, to let go of guilt, shame, blame, justification. If you're willing, then we're already so much further along than you would ever imagine. So be willing.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We're going to continue the conversation over on our Facebook group. So please, I shared the link in the chat. We're going to be on there for a little bit. So if anyone's interested in asking more questions, happy to help answer and continue to connect with other people. So thank you so much for everyone for joining. We hope to see you in the next Strive conversation. Before we go, I'm starting this new tradition where I'm going to allow everyone to unmute themselves. so that we can all give a round of applause and thank Magalie for her amazing time with us. So please unmute yourself. I know, right? It's so different when you're doing it virtually.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
That was amazing talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So exciting to see all of your faces. Thank you. Bring this out into the world. Share this with others. Share this with yourself. Really come back to yourself around compassion. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
It was very impactful.
It'll be on YouTube, so you can share it to all your friends that couldn't make it, and that one person that keeps getting on your nerves talking about racism, share it with them because they need to see this. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see everyone next time.
Bye, everyone.